Ferrari is on the hunt for a new Formula 1 team boss in the hope that they will be the magic missing piece of the puzzle to end the team's losing streak. In 2022, Ferrari extended a run of underachievement in F1, and that has led to the departure of team principal Mattia Binotto. As we've covered in a previous video, Binotto's downfall is self-inflicted to a degree, as Ferrari did not improve in some key areas under his watch. But his exit is a symptom of a much bigger problem, one that clearly still has roots deep within Ferrari's organisation, and as we'll explain, there will be no meaningful progress for F1's most famous team unless this gets addressed. For all the team's failings in 2022, Binotto's exit is at least partly down to a flawed upper management structure that gives too much power to people that are too distant from the F1 team itself. At Ferrari, the chairman and the CEO call the shots across the board. There is nobody within the F1 organisation who can really stand up to that. So a big part of the issue is one of empowerment. The team boss isn't really the boss, they're ultimately just another employee of the overall company. And the result is they operate under even more intense pressure than the job already invites, and are directly vulnerable to changes in the boardroom, given that whoever seems to be CEO or chairman tends to enjoy playing favourites. Let's take the Binotto situation as an example. Ferrari's leadership has changed completely since he was first identified as the future leader of the team by Sergio Marchionne, who held both the chairman and CEO roles until his death in 2018. When Marchionne passed away before that transition took place, John Elkann became chairman while Louis Camilleri became CEO. Binotto always spoke very warmly of Camilleri, who seemed to have a more direct link to the team boss than Elkann, and seemed to grasp the kind of reform within the F1 team that was required to end a cycle of self-defeating trigger happiness. When Camilleri left at the end of 2020 after battling COVID, Binotto's position immediately seemed weaker. Last summer, a new CEO was appointed, Benedetto Vigna, and within 18 months, the new axis of power at the very top of Ferrari is recruiting a new team principal. It's not a coincidence, it's part of the team boss carousel that the Ferrari structure invites. Just look at what Mercedes boss Toto Wolff had to say about Binotto's exit, claiming his adversary stayed in charge longer than I thought because being forced out is unavoidable at some point. Wolff has faced 4 different Ferrari team bosses since he entered F1 a decade ago, and at Mercedes he is part of a much more empowering F1 structure that we'll come to later in this video, so he is well placed to judge, and the facts back him up. Stefano Domenicali, Marco Mattiacci and Maurizio Arrivabene have all been removed from the job as team principal during the V6 turbo hybrid engine era alone. Now Binotto's gone too, jumping before he was pushed. Wolff says there is absolutely more pressure at the famous Italian team than any other, and says they are treated with brutality. Ferrari's history is littered with evidence it has never quite worked in the way that an F1 team needs to. The obvious exception is the period of domination spearheaded by Jean Todt, Ross Brawn and Michael Schumacher, which was pretty much the only time in the team's history that it was actually shielded from any wider politics within Ferrari. Now though, Ferrari looks more out of touch with the demands of F1 than ever, with a fundamentally flawed structure. If you lead Ferrari's F1 team, you're exposed to a more volatile higher power. And it's impossible to imagine a modern, elite sporting organisation can truly prosper in such an environment where the leader of the team is replaced every few years. By changing the team boss, Ferrari risks a Groundhog Day repeat. And on that very subject, it's worth listening to what another of our F1 correspondents, Mark Hughes, said on an episode of the Race F1 podcast.
Whoever goes there will make changes. It will ultimately not be enough to make them a title-winning team. There'll be increasing pressure. They'll be fired, and then somebody else will. It'll just go on and on. The fact that Binotto's head has been taken, will that seep through the culture elsewhere, and we revert to a team that's where people are afraid to go out on a limb and be creative? I think what we're seeing is the early stages of a long-term problem for Ferrari. I think I don't see this as the beginning of a recovery. I see this as the beginning of a deeper problem.
But the trigger-happy types in Ferrari's upper echelons will probably miss the point. They view an F1 team like any other of their businesses, driven by trying to achieve results in the short term and putting far too much emphasis on what others, especially the Italian media, have to say about things. Binotto may not have been the perfect team boss, and maybe he would turn out to be lacking, but time and autonomy are required for any leader to really imprint on an organisation. After 2 self-inflicted years in the wilderness, Ferrari had a race-winning car again in 2022, and while this season exposed shortcomings in strategy, engine reliability and car development, which were frustratingly familiar weaknesses for Ferrari, it was the first time Binotto really had to grapple with them. There's a good case to be made that the best solution was to empower the team principal to try to address them in 2023 and then act if he failed to. Expecting a turnaround in the space of a few months is foolhardy at best. It's dangerously close to the football club mentality of replacing one person and expecting that to be a solution that may lead to a new manager bounce when there's a handy short-term improvement. But it defeats a far greater purpose, as every time this happens, the clock is reset and any good work done so far is largely undone. Ferrari is not alone in having an F1 team that is part of a bigger empire, but the way its team can be directly interfered with and the regularity with which that happens is unique. For instance, Binotto's immediate equals at Mercedes and Red Bull are anything but equals in reality. Christian Horner is CEO of Red Bull Racing and other Red Bull badged F1 related endeavours. Wolff is not only CEO of Mercedes F1 team, but is also a shareholder. In reality, they have security and autonomy that a Ferrari team principal could only dream of. And unlike Ferrari, the Red Bull and Mercedes F1 teams are not just items on a balance sheet that one or two detached higher powers, like the chairman or CEO of a much larger organisation, has both ultimate authority over and a need to keep shareholders happy. Red Bull's been managed by Horner for its entire F1 history dating back to 2005, while Mercedes has been headed by Wolff since 2013. It's no coincidence that since Ferrari's last title in 2008, Mercedes has won 8 Constructors and 7 Drivers' Championships, while Red Bull has won 6 Drivers' Championships and 5 Constructors' Crowns. Each team has experienced its own difficulties too, but how often did you hear of Dietrich Mateschitz meddling with the management structure of Red Bull Racing when the team struggled at the start of the V6 turbo hybrid era, or of Ola Kalenius rushing to install new people at Mercedes at the start of 2022 when it got the new technical regulations badly wrong? It didn't happen because the team bosses were protected, either calling the shots themselves or at least being able to trust the highest power. So what's the solution, given Binotto's successor has to pick up the mantle of attempting to deliver Ferrari a title for the first time since it won the Constructors in 2008? The clue is partly in how Ferrari's rivals operate and partly in its latest real era of success under the Todd Braun-Schumacher juggernaut. That trio was able to end a 21-year wait for a driver's title in 2000 after several years of restructuring since Todd was first appointed in 1993. The patience and the creative control enjoyed by Todd and Braun during that time is something severely lacking for Ferrari's modern team bosses. History suggests the way Ferrari needs to be run to pull all of the disparate pieces together is to have someone brought in from the outside, given a budget to control and autonomy to get on with things. Whether this could be enshrined in the formal structure is hard to say, but someone on the level of the company CEO would make sense, in a role overseeing the competition side of the business, basically a CEO for the racing division with a team principal underneath. Whatever the exact setup, it would need to create a buffer between the F1 team and the powers that be, protecting everybody at Maranello from any board level nonsense, like what Todd was able to do under Luca de Montezemolo. Only then will the F1 team be able to stop operating at the mercy of people who ultimately do not know what an F1 team needs.